What if the life you were groomed to inherit was the very thing holding you hostage? I was born into a family of power, reputation, and unspoken rules. They taught me how to speak, how to dress, how to disappear behind someone else's spotlight. But they forgot to teach me what to do when the silence starts to burn. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about reclaiming your name, even if you have to rewrite the legacy they wrote for you. If you've ever felt trapped in someone else's version of your life, or had to fight to be seen for who you really are, then trust me, you'll want to hear this all the way through. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button, and let's begin. My name is Vivian Hale, and I was born into a family where status was scripture and sacrifice was hereditary. Not the kind of sacrifice that earns you a medal. No, ours was the quiet, soul-eroding type. The kind no one writes songs about. I was 33 years old when I was asked to marry a man I didn't love. Not for romance, not for family, but for leverage. You see, I come from the Hales of Boston, yes, those Hales. The ones with generations of Harvard graduates, governors, senators, judges. If you can picture mahogany panels, oil portraits, and family mottos in Latin, you're on the right track. But I was never one of them. Not really. I was the creative one. The black sheep who traded political science for scenic design and lighting plots. While my cousins debated public policy over Bordeaux at age 12, I was backstage painting sets and falling in love with silence before curtain rise. They let me be eccentric until my eccentricity became inconvenient. That moment arrived on a Sunday morning in October. I had just returned to Boston from a rap meeting in New York. I'd been working as lead designer for a new off-Broadway play, minimalist expressionist realism, they'd called it. I'd called it profitable and timely, which in my world was rare praise. My bank account had just crossed 6 figures for the first time in a decade. My career was for once not on life support. And that's exactly when they summoned me. Family brunch, said the message from Aunt Eleanor. No subject line, no emojis, just authority. The Hale estate in Beacon Hill hadn't changed in decades. Still smelled like varnished old money and a hint of passive aggression. I remember walking into the drawing room, the creak of leather under my coat as I sat across from my uncle who was already sipping his first scotch of the day. And there she was, Scarlett, my cousin, perched like porcelain eyes rimmed red with theatrical regret. Vivian, Aunt Eleanor began using my full name like a weapon. We have a situation that requires diplomacy. I knew the tone. This wasn't brunch. This was a boardroom ambush disguised with china. Scarlett was engaged to Noah Bennett, heir to the Bennett Media Group. Their marriage had been orchestrated like a high-stakes merger, with Noah's father eyeing a Senate seat and our family needing his media empire's favor to smooth out a few, let's say, regulatory complications. This union was the linchpin. Only now it was unraveling. Scarlett was pregnant. The father, a jazz musician from New Orleans. No surname required. Just enough scandal to tank 3 generations of planning. The wedding was in 6 weeks. The press was already sniffing around. The country club had issued engraved invitations. And that's when my mother said the words that would redirect the rest of my life. Vivian, you'll take her place. I laughed. Loud. The kind of laugh that gets stuck halfway between disbelief and fury. You want me to marry Noah Bennett? Why, you're unmarried, Aunt Eleanor said plainly. You're available, and you're discreet. But I'm not in love with him. I don't even like him. You don't need to, Uncle Charles said, as if I'd asked what time it was. This isn't about you. It's about all of us. And there it was. My entire identity reduced to a pawn in a dynastic chess game. They said Scarlett's name couldn't be dragged through the press. They said the Bennett contract was binding. Legal teams had already vetted the merger. Engagement. They said I owed it to the family for all they'd tolerated from me. Noah, oh, he agreed immediately. When we met the next day at a private suite overlooking the Charles River, he barely looked up from his phone. I'm not expecting love, he said flatly. Just civility. Be where you're supposed to be. Smile when necessary, and for God's sake, don't embarrass me. I asked him one question. What do you get out of this? He smirked. A better public image. Scarlett's too volatile. You, Vivian, are forgettable in all the right ways. Forgettable. That word stuck to my ribs like gristle. I left that suite with my hands shaking and my jaw locked. But not because I was scared. No. Because I felt the tectonic plates of my identity shift underfoot. For the first time in years, I saw the cage I'd been raised in. I should have said no. I should have burned that legacy to ash and walked away. But instead, I said yes, not for them, for me. Because if I was going to be their sacrificial lamb, I'd make damn sure I'd choose the altar. And when the curtain fell, it wouldn't be on their ending. It would be on my beginning. They say a wedding is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. But what they never tell you, what no glossy magazine dares print, is how easy it is to become invisible in your own fairy tale. 3 weeks. That's how long it took to erase Scarlett from the narrative and insert me in her place. The planners adjusted the monogram napkins. The invitation cards were reprinted overnight. My measurements were close enough that the Vera Wang dress didn't need more than a few darts. All that remained of the original bride was the script, and no one was interested in a rewrite. Just play the part, my mother whispered as we rehearsed the procession inside the Bennett family chapel. You've done theater. You know how to disappear into a role. That sentence haunted me, because it was never about me being the bride. It was about me not being Scarlett. Scarlett had charm, softness, the right kind of beauty. I had efficiency, compliance, silence. I was never the main character. Just the stand-in until the real star could return. Vivian Hale, practical, dependable, photogenic, in a neutral way. Even Noah's team approved. His publicist sent me a mood board. Vivian's image should project elegance without overshadowing Noah. Translation: be decorative, not dynamic. I nodded, smiled, agreed. But inside something volcanic was stirring. Each morning I woke up rehearsing lines that weren't mine. Each night I fell asleep wondering if disappearing would feel like dying or like peace. Then came the photo shoot. The pre-wedding editorial was scheduled at Bennett Manor, Noah's ancestral estate. All white columns and curated nostalgia. We were instructed to dress timelessly. A stylist handed me a pale pink dress. Noah wore navy and didn't look up from his phone once during the shoot. The photographer clicked, adjusted, clicked again. Closer, she said. More affection. I reached for his hand. He let me fingers limp in mine. Click. That image, my hand grasping his like a dying vine around a dead tree, would appear in Town and Prestige the following month, under the headline, Old Money Meets Modern Grace. What a lie. Noah didn't speak to me that day, except for one moment. After the final shot, as I walked toward the house to change, I caught him whispering into his phone. I told you it's just for optics. I'm not marrying her for real. I'm marrying her name. He didn't know I was behind him. He didn't see my face fall. Or maybe he did and simply didn't care. When I confronted him that evening, I expected excuses, denial, deflection. What I got was worse. Vivian, don't act surprised, he said coolly, pouring himself a drink in the drawing room. You knew this wasn't about love. It's not personal. It's political. You're still seeing her, I said. I didn't have to name her. We both knew who her was. He didn't deny it. We have history, chemistry, but she's not stable. You are. You make people comfortable. I stood there too stunned to speak. He sipped his scotch. Think of it this way. You'll have freedom, money, influence. I won't interfere with your little career. In fact, I might even fund a theater or two under your name. You get the spotlight. I get the votes. Everyone wins. There it was. The contract beneath the vows. No affection, no honesty. Just mutual exploitation in high thread count sheets. But what if I say no? I asked. He raised an eyebrow. Then you go back to being a broke set designer scraping together grant money. And your family loses a $1 billion media alliance. Do you really want to be the one who ruined the Hale legacy? There it was again. The reminder that I didn't own my name. I rented it. And the rent was due. I walked out without another word. The next morning, I woke early, packed a bag, drove 3 hours back to New York without telling anyone. Jamie opened the door to her studio apartment in sweatpants and eyeliner smudged from sleep. You look like you just escaped a cult, she said, pulling me into a hug. I collapsed onto her couch. She handed me coffee and didn't ask questions. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body was still, my brain riotous. I stared at the ceiling, the moonlight catching on the water stain that curved like a question mark. And the only question in my head was, what if I stopped being their solution? What if for once I didn't disappear into a role? What if I wrote my own? You don't really notice how many of your possessions are ornamental until you have to choose what fits in a duffel bag. I stood in Jamie's cramped kitchen at 2:00 a.m., eating dry cereal straight from the box, still wearing the beige shift dress from my bridal fitting. The dress had cost more than the down payment on her entire apartment, and now it had a coffee stain down the side and smelled faintly of vodka and anxiety. I should have brought sweatpants, I muttered. Jamie was half asleep on the couch, but still managed to grunt. There's dignity in elastic waistbands. We'd met in college. She was a screenwriting major with purple hair and combat boots. I was the girl sketching set pieces during ethics class. She understood reinvention better than anyone. Her apartment was covered in sticky notes, half-written scripts, and books with dog-eared pages about structure and subtext. And now, apparently, she also understood crisis triage. You can stay as long as you need, she said. I've already cleared out the bookshelf. Your bridal shower gifts now live where my Criterion collection used to be. I laughed. Then I cried. And then I did what every woman does when her entire world has collapsed. I opened a spreadsheet. By day 3, the adrenaline had worn off, and the reality was sobering. My name had been wiped from my former life, just as swiftly as it had been inserted. Scarlett was traveling abroad. Noah had issued a brief statement. Due to unforeseen changes, the wedding is postponed indefinitely. The press didn't dig. The Bennetts were too powerful. The Hales too practiced in scandal containment. I was invisible again. Financially, I wasn't destitute, but I was dangerously close to being impossibly fragile. My savings, about $11, $200, was the remainder of sporadic consulting gigs, freelance theater jobs, and design stipends. My last production hadn't paid out its final invoice yet. I had no permanent contracts, no trust fund, and no media-friendly sob story to sell to a talk show. In short, I had enough to survive 2 months in New York if I didn't eat too much. I tried freelancing, again reached out to old contacts and off-Broadway. A few were sympathetic. A few were politely unhelpful. Most didn't reply. The industry moved on fast. I had moved too far away for too long. I was no longer relevant. But something else had begun growing inside me. Not bitterness, not yet. Something more combustible. One night, after too much boxed wine and not enough dignity, I curled up on Jamie's couch and whispered, I think I want to tell my version. Jamie didn't look up from her laptop. Of the wedding, no. Of everything. She blinked, then smiled. Good. About damn time. We started with index cards. Scene by scene, what began as therapy, an exorcism of shame and fury, slowly evolved into structure. Jamie guided me through the beats, like a director coaxing an actor back on stage. She'd done this 100 times, just never with someone whose life had been press released like a marketing campaign. Each card was a scar, the day I was told I'd be Scarlett's stand-in. The photo shoot where I became the brand. The moment Noah admitted I was forgettable, and then we hit the storm, literally. 3 weeks in, the landlord informed Jamie that a pipe had burst upstairs. Water damage. Uninhabitable for at least 2 weeks. She moved in with her girlfriend in Brooklyn. I had nowhere else to go. The storage unit with my name on it was back in Boston, likely emptied by now. My old apartment had long since been given to someone more stable, and I hadn't spoken to my parents since the night I left. At 10:30 p.m., in the middle of a downpour, I found myself outside a 24-hour diner in Queens, dragging a rolling suitcase and trying not to sob in public. The cheap motel across the street had flickering neon and a Yelp rating of 1.8. I checked in anyway. Room 207 smelled like mildew and broken dreams. The bedspread had cigarette burns. The TV was bolted to the dresser. I sat on the edge of the mattress, soaked through, and opened my laptop. I had nothing, no safety net, no family, no wedding, no career. But I had a script, and I had one hell of a story. So I opened a blank document, title The Stand-In Bride, and I began to write. You'd be surprised how quickly trauma sharpens your writing. I wrote for 14 hours straight that first night in the motel. The rain tapped on the window like applause from ghosts. My fingers ached, my eyes stung, but for the first time in weeks my breathing was steady. The words poured out not as a confessional, but as a construction, a framework. This wasn't therapy, it was strategy. I wasn't telling my story, I was adapting it. The working title was still The Stand-In Bride, but by dawn it had become something bigger, a quiet rebellion dressed as a romantic drama. I didn't just recreate what happened, I restructured it, beat by beat, with emotional weight and narrative stakes. Jamie had taught me the cardinal rule of great screenwriting: don't just tell them what broke you. Show them how you rebuilt yourself. So I did. By the end of week 1, I had a complete outline. By the end of week 2, I had a rough draft. Jamie came by the motel on a Saturday with 2 coffees, a printed script, and her usual smirk. She sat cross-legged on the sagging bed, flipping through the pages with the speed of someone expecting disappointment. But the longer she read, the more still she became. Jesus, she whispered halfway through Act 2. This isn't just good. This is... She looked up. Her eyes were glassy. This is yours. That night we had a meeting, not at a studio, not with agents, but with ourselves. 2 women, 1 finished script, and a plan we dared to believe in. We spent the next week editing, punching up dialogue, tuning emotional arcs, shaping subtext. And then Jamie said 6 words that changed everything. Let's send it out blind. No names, no resumes, no baggage. Just the story. We created a pseudonym, V.M. Hale. Gender neutral, ambiguous, untraceable. Jamie submitted it to a friend who worked at Crossline Pictures, a boutique production company, known for edgy indies with emotional teeth. They had recently optioned a play that went on to Sundance. Not huge, but influential. The kind of place where voices mattered more than pedigree. We waited. For 3 days, nothing. Then on the 4th, Jamie's phone buzzed. She didn't say anything, just handed it to me. From C.R. Blake, producer, Crossline Pictures. Subject: the stand-in bride submission. Read it twice. Couldn't put it down. Authentic, heartbreaking, and sharp. Want to meet the writer ASA. I stared at the screen like it was a hallucination, then laughed, then sobbed. We scheduled a meeting for the following week. Crossline's offices were in Tribeca, industrial, modern, intimidating in the way only successful small firms can be. Everything smelled like ambition and eucalyptus. I wore the only outfit I had left that didn't scream abandoned fiancé: high-waisted trousers, a silk blouse, and a trench coat that still bore a faint whiff of Boston autumn. Jamie sat beside me in the waiting area, tapping her foot. Then the assistant appeared. Mr. Blake will see you now. He greeted us with a warm smile, offered coffee, and got right to the point. I don't know who you are, he said, but I know what this is. He tapped the cover of the printed script on his desk. This is a film, not a treatment, not a pitch. A film. He asked how long I'd been writing. I told him truthfully I'd written plays, scenery, dialogues, and margins, but this was the first time I'd written myself. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. He offered a shopping agreement on the spot, 6 months exclusive rights to shop the script to financiers and distributors. Option fee was modest, $3,500 upfront plus 5% backend if sold. Jamie's hand squeezed my knee under the table. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a door. I signed. And just like that, my story had a studio. What happened next was both surreal and perfectly timed. 2 weeks later, Crossline landed a development deal with a European film fund looking for female-led projects. The stand-in bride was at the top of their list. Casting suggestions began circulating. A-list adjacent actresses. A European director known for visual melancholy. Cinematographers with Sundance laurels. It was happening. I kept quiet. Even when the studio's internal memo mentioned that Noah Bennett had quietly invested in the fund's North American slate through his media company. Even when I saw Scarlett's name attached to a separate prestige miniseries under the same umbrella. The irony was exquisite. Noah would unknowingly bankroll the film that exposed him. Scarlett would walk red carpets while the world applauded my version of her sins. And I would not be the woman in the background anymore. I would be the author of the whole damn stage. There's a strange power in anonymity. For the first time in my adult life, I was part of something important without being the face of it. While Scarlett was fielding questions from gossip columnists about her extended sabbatical in Vienna, I was sitting in a sunlit room in Brooklyn, reviewing shot lists with the director of a film she didn't even know was about her. The irony was so perfect, it tasted like dessert. The director's name was Callum Reyes, a dual citizen from Madrid and LA, known for his evocative, emotionally restrained visual style. His last indie film about an aging ballerina reclaiming her career had earned quiet critical acclaim. He read The Stand-In Bride in a single sitting, then sent a message to Crossline's head of development. This is the most emotionally disciplined script I've ever read from a first-time writer. I want to meet her. That meeting happened on a Tuesday. It was supposed to be a 30-minute creative alignment call. It lasted 4 hours. We discussed character arc, emotional subtext, camera language. But more than anything, Callum kept returning to one question. How did you write someone who feels invisible so vividly? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He just nodded. That unspoken understanding between people who've both lived on the edge of other people's stories became the backbone of our collaboration. By the second week of pre-production, I wasn't just a writer with a film in motion. I was a producer. Quietly, Jamie and I had founded a small LLC, Second Draft Studios, through which we retained back-end rights and story development control. Callum signed on not just as director, but as a minority partner, something most directors would have scoffed at. But Callum wasn't most directors. He believed in the story, and he believed in my authorship. The shoot was scheduled for late spring in upstate New York, a 2-month production timeline, modest budget, international co-financing, but more than enough to make it real. And real came fast. Casting calls, costume tests, blocking rehearsals. Watching an actress say lines you once whispered to yourself in a motel bathroom is surreal in a way I'll never fully explain. It was as if my humiliation had been transcribed, polished, and handed back to me this time as proof of resilience. We cast a rising indie darling, Elena Rossi, to play the lead, a theater designer forced into a marriage of convenience. She didn't look like me. She didn't talk like me. But when she delivered the line, "I'm not the main character in your life, but I sure as hell am in mine," I had to leave the room. Callum found me outside, pacing beside a grip truck. "You okay?" I nodded, then shook my head. "This is harder than I thought." He didn't ask for clarification, just handed me his coffee and said, "Then we're doing it right." Between takes, Callum and I began lingering longer. Late-night edit reviews turned into midnight walks. Our text chains grew from timecode notes to philosophical arguments to shared playlists. He never asked about my past. He didn't need to. But one night after wrap, as we sat beside a portable fire pit outside the cabin housing the crew, he asked one question that wasn't about cinema. "Why didn't you put your real name on the script?" I stared into the flames for a long time. Then I said, "Because I wanted the story to matter more than my pain, and because some people still have the power to make my truth look like revenge." He didn't push, just nodded. But the next morning, I found a note in my inbox, subject scene edition, final monologue option body. Sometimes the only way to rewrite your story is to burn the old script. It wasn't in the original, but it was perfect, and we used it. Midway through production, Crossline hosted a private preview screening for potential distributors and international partners at their Manhattan office. A small event, 12 people. One of them, of course, was Noah Bennett's chief acquisitions officer, sent on behalf of the board to assess content viability for streaming verticals. I sat in the back of the room. She never once turned to notice me. She didn't know what I looked like. She just scribbled 3 words on her coverage sheet at the end of the screener: emotionally lethal. Marketable. The deal memo came 2 days later. Crossline sold limited North American streaming rights for low 7 figures. It would cover 70% of production costs up front. The rest would be earned back before we even hit distribution in Europe. Callum and I walked out of the Crossline office, dazed and silent. Then he grinned. "Your story just funded itself. And them." I stared at him. Then I laughed, deep, guttural, free. I thought about Noah. I thought about Scarlett. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted to outlast them. Every revenge story needs a stage. Mine was gilded in gold, trimmed in velvet, and seated 312 of Boston's elite. The New England Society for the Arts was hosting the premiere of The Stand-In Bride. As the centerpiece of its annual gala, a black tie event attended by politicians, socialites, legacy donors, and of course, the Hales. I never RSVP'd. Didn't need to. Crossline's PR team had arranged it all, screens, photographers, the city's finest caterer. I stood quietly in the wings, sipping sparkling water, wearing a black off-shoulder gown Callum had chosen, saying simply, "It looks like armor." I hadn't told him my family would be here. I didn't need to. He'd pieced it together weeks ago when he saw the list of strategic guests forwarded from the event coordinator. Your cousin, he'd said, eyes skimming the roster. Scarlett Hale, she RSVP'd +1. I didn't ask who the +1 was. I didn't care. The lobby buzzed with Pearl's cufflinks and the scent of wealth being laundered into prestige. I watched from a balcony above as they arrived, Scarlett, in a minimalist white satin dress that practically screamed Gilt Noah in classic black, charming the photographers with that smile that used to make me doubt myself. My mother was there too, in navy silk flanked by board members and shaking hands like it was still election season. They didn't see me, not yet. Inside the theater, the room dimmed, a hush fell, and then the screen lit up. The opening scene was quiet, a bride in a dressing room alone. Her veil trembled as she stared at her reflection like she didn't recognize the woman staring back. No music, just the sound of her breath. Then the title card, The Stand-In Bride, a film by V.M. Hale. 3 rows back, I saw Noah tilt his head. It wasn't until the third scene that realization began to bloom. Lines lifted verbatim from private conversations. A shot framed exactly like that photo shoot in the Bennett estate courtyard. The monologue about being chosen for convenience, not connection. Delivered in Elena Rossi's perfect cadence, but sharpened like a blade. By the time the wedding rehearsal scene played where the groom whispers into a phone that he's marrying her for optics, Scarlett's face had gone pale. My mother turned in her seat. I watched her scanning the rows behind her. Her eyes met mine. I didn't blink. Applause erupted as the credits rolled. Elena Rossi's name flashed, Callum's, Jamie's, Crossline, and finally, Story by V.M. Hale, written and produced by Vivian M. Hale. The spotlight swung. Gasps, whispers, camera flashes. I stepped onto the stage. The moderator smiled nervously, clearly not expecting this plot twist. We're honored tonight to welcome not just the writer, but the woman whose real-life experience inspired this film. Vivienne, would you like to say a few words? I stepped to the mic. My voice was calm, my spine steel. I never expected to stand here tonight. A year ago, I was supposed to marry a man for strategic alliance, not love. I was told I was a placeholder, a safe option, a name that wouldn't make waves. I scanned the crowd. Scarlett was frozen. Noah's hand clenched the armrest. My mother looked like porcelain about to crack. But placeholders don't write stories, and safe options don't sell out theaters. So I wrote the truth dressed as fiction. And tonight you've all seen what it looks like when a woman reclaims her narrative. The room was silent, then a single clap, then 2, then a standing ovation. Even people who didn't know the details felt what had happened, the rawness, the power, the transformation. I nodded, then stepped down, walking off stage with Callum waiting just behind the curtain. His hand found mine. He whispered, "You didn't just steal the scene. You rewrote the ending." That night, I didn't attend the after party. I had nothing left to prove in glitter or champagne. Instead, I walked alone through Boston Common in heels that didn't hurt anymore, in a dress that no longer felt like armor but skin. At the far end of the garden beside the fountain where my father used to bring me as a child, I found my mother waiting. No entourage, no media, just her. She looked at me, her voice trembling in a way I hadn't heard since I was 7. I didn't know, not all of it. I believe that I said, but you didn't ask either. She reached into her clutch and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a folded letter yellowed at the edges. "It's from your grandmother. She wrote it the year before she passed. Said to give it to you if you ever decided to leave the family path." I unfolded it. Just one sentence. "The real legacy is not what you inherit. It's what you choose to leave behind." I smiled, and for the first time in years, my mother didn't look at me like a failure. She looked at me like a woman. Applause fades, but silence lingers. The morning after the premiere, I woke to 37 unread messages. Some were congratulations from former colleagues, theater peers, journalists who now saw me as an emerging voice in American cinema. Others were more complicated. One from Noah. "Can we talk? I didn't know it would be this personal. You blindsided me." As if I'd used his private trauma. One from my Aunt Eleanor. "Your mother is heartbroken. Your timing was cruel." As if I'd hijacked a wedding, not survived one. And one from Scarlett. Just 5 words. "I didn't know you hated me." I stared at that one the longest. Not because it hurt, because it revealed how little she ever understood me. I agreed to meet with Scarlett. Not out of curiosity, not even closure, but because I knew this chapter couldn't end with her words echoing unanswered. We met at the Langston House, a quiet tea salon on the South End, where Boston's elites go to cry over scandal and refill their Botox appointments. She was already seated when I arrived. Nails perfect face, lightly made-up posture, immaculate. Scarlett had always been elegant in the way expensive things often are, pristine, polished, untouchable. But today, she looked tired. "Viv," she began, her voice soft. "No pleasantries," I said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Say what you came to say." She blinked, startled, then composed herself. "I didn't know it would go that far. I thought you were doing fine after everything." Noah said, I repeated. "There's your first mistake." She exhaled. "I didn't ask you to take my place. That was the family. I didn't mean for you to get hurt." I stirred my tea slowly. "You didn't ask, but you didn't stop them either." Her lip twitched. "I was scared. I was pregnant. I didn't know what would happen if I blew up the arrangement." "You've always been stronger than me." I smiled. But it wasn't kind. "No, Scarlett. I was never stronger. I was just more disposable." That landed. Her eyes watered. But I didn't flinch. "You were the jewel," I continued. "The heirloom daughter. You were allowed chaos, emotion, mistakes. I was expected to stay quiet, make it elegant, and vanish." "You're right," she whispered. "I let them use you." "No," I corrected. "You watched them use me. There's a difference." Scarlett reached across the table, tentative. I didn't move. "I'm sorry," she said, voice thick with shame. "I thought you hated me." "I didn't," I said plainly. "Not until you let them break me and called it family duty." We sat in silence. For once she had no script. I gathered my coat. "Scarlett, I don't need an apology," I said. "I need you to remember how it felt when you watched someone else live the life you were too afraid to ruin." Then I left. 2 days later, I received another invitation, this time from my mother. No event, no press, just lunch. At the Hale residence. The place I once called home. I nearly didn't go. But Callum said something that stuck with me. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't burn the bridge. It's choose whether to walk back across it or not. So I went. The house hadn't changed. Still the same oil paintings, the same scent of antique ambition. But now I no longer felt like I belonged or had to. My mother met me in the garden. She looked older, or maybe just less composed. The way people look when they finally admit they lost something they'll never get back. "I watched the film again," she said. "No small talk." I nodded. "I saw you, for the first time maybe." I didn't answer. She gestured toward the wrought iron bench. "I'm not here to make excuses," she said. "We failed you. We weaponized your silence. Because it was easier than dealing with your truth." "That's accurate," I said. She looked away. "We can't undo what we did, but if you're willing, I'd like to start again. No conditions, no legacy strings. Just me trying to know you." I studied her. The woman who once measured my worth in tax deductions and table manners now sat before me, asking not for absolution, but access. That was new. That was earned. "I'm open to conversations," I said. "But I don't need a mother. I needed one then." She nodded, accepting it like a verdict. We spoke for 15 more minutes. Not about Scarlett, not about Noah. Just about what I was building now, who I was becoming. And for the first time she listened. Not to reply, but to understand. As I left, she handed me an envelope. Not cash, not legal documents, just a check. "Pay to the order of Second Draft Studios, memo first contribution." Not a bailout. A belief. It was modest, but meaningful. Because for the first time, the Hale name wasn't being used to erase me, but to invest in me. Building something real starts with unlearning everything you were taught about what's valuable. Especially when you were raised in a house that only measured worth by headlines, networks, and surnames. After the premiere, after the tea room confessions and garden reconciliations, I took 3 days to do nothing but breathe. Then I called Jamie. "We're not done," I said. Her reply, "I was hoping you'd say that." So we moved. Fast. Second Draft Studios was no longer just a shell LLC created for legal ownership. It was becoming real, brick by brick, stone by stone. We leased a modest floor in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, wide windows, creaky floors, exposed pipes, and infinite potential. The same week, Callum wired his personal investment. Jamie secured a small business grant through an arts equity program. My mother's check, modest but symbolically seismic, was the first institutional donation we'd ever received. It became our seed capital. We didn't waste a dollar. Callum and I drew up a 5-year plan, like it was a film script, act by act, conflict by conflict, payoff by payoff. Phase 1. Incubate 3 short-form digital series by first-time women writers, all under 35. All with backgrounds like mine, non-traditional, unsupported, underestimated. We titled the program Write Her Story. The pitch was simple but razor sharp. You don't need to be discovered. You need to be equipped. I recruited mentors from the theater world. Jamie leveraged her screenwriting contacts. Callum brought in a post-production team from Spain who agreed to work for equity. We weren't building a vanity project. We were building infrastructure for dissent. 3 months and the applications flooded our inbox. From everywhere: Detroit, Oakland, El Paso, the Bronx. Even one woman writing from a women's shelter in Phoenix. They didn't just want funding, they wanted permission. Permission to be angry, to be flawed, to be heard, to take up space. I read every letter. One stayed with me, a 26-year-old ex-ballet dancer turned playwright. She'd been dropped by her agent after refusing to sleep with a director. Her writing, unapologetic, brutal, electric. We gave her the first slot. While second draft bloomed, so did something else. Something I hadn't planned for. Callum and I had spent months side by side drafting, editing, negotiating. Always professional, always aligned. Until one night after a late script session, he said quietly, "You know this thing we're building. It's not just art, it's rebellion." And then more softly, "You're the first person I've ever followed gladly." It should have scared me, but instead it felt like home. We didn't declare anything. We didn't rush. We just allowed it. And somehow that was more intimate than anything I'd experienced before. No games, no leverage, just mutual respect wrapped in stolen glances. 6 months after the premiere, we hosted our first industry showcase for the Write Her Story program. We rented out an old cinema in Tribeca, kept it intimate, no red carpet, no hashtags. But the seats were full. Elena Rossi came, so did 2 major streaming scouts, a critic from IndieWire, and 3 former professors of mine, none of whom had taken me seriously when I was just a set designer. The short films screened were ferocious. Stories about queer identity, class rage, abortion stigma, emotional abuse told without apology or compromise. At the end of the night, one of the producers whispered, "I haven't felt this much raw storytelling in a decade." I smiled and said, "That's because no one asked these women to make it pretty." The day after the showcase, I received an email from an associate editor at The New Yorker. Subject: profile request, Vivian Hale. They wanted to do a feature, not a puff piece. A serious, in-depth profile on a woman who walked away from legacy and built one of her own. I forwarded it to Jamie with one line. "So, I guess we're real now," her reply. "We've always been real. They're just finally looking." I visited the Pineview Motel the week after. Room 207 was still there. Same flickering hallway light. Same front desk bell. But the owners were new, younger. A couple from New Jersey who'd bought the place and started turning it into a haven for transitional housing. They let me see the room. I stood in the doorway, remembering the night I'd typed the first words of The Stand-In Bride on a dented laptop with frozen fingers. I left a note in the drawer. Sometimes the smallest rooms birth the biggest voices. Don't whisper, shout. VH. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Scarlett. I watched the film again, not to feel guilty, just to understand. I think I finally do. I'm not asking for anything, just, "Thank you for telling it." I didn't reply. Some things don't need closure. Some stories are better left framed, not reopened. It didn't feel like an ending. Standing backstage at the Lyric Theater in Manhattan, the very same place I used to enter through the side alley hauling props and dodging glances, it didn't feel like a finale. It felt like arrival. The lights were already dimmed. The audience beyond the curtain was a murmur of anticipation and sequined rustle. I could hear Callum's voice through the comms checking cues with the tech team. Jamie had just texted front row packed. "You're gonna fly." And me, I was adjusting my grandmother's bracelet, the one I found in the shoebox under her bed the week she passed. The one she wore when she walked away from Broadway in 1962, pregnant, brilliant, and invisible. She never made it back to this stage, but I did. Tonight was the official debut of The Stand-In Bride as a full Broadway production. Sold out, 6 weeks in advance. Critics had called the workshop version audacious, disruptive, astonishing. The Times preview hinted at Tony buzz. But none of that mattered more than the people in this story. Jasmine, the queer playwright from Phoenix, now a staff writer at a major studio. Lana, whose film about domestic violence had gone viral and landed her a fellowship. Even my mother sitting somewhere in the third row, dressed not to impress but to belong. Subtle, soft, proud. And yes, Scarlett was there. We hadn't spoken since her message months ago, but she'd come. Not as a plea, not for validation. Just to witness. There was something poetic in that. For so long I had existed in her shadow. Tonight she sat in mine, not out of revenge, but release. The curtain rose, and for 2 hours the room forgot itself. The audience gasped when Lila's veil dropped, revealing not a demure bride, but a fierce, complicated woman. They cried when she stood at her father's grave, reading the letter she was never allowed to send. They laughed genuinely at the dry, wicked humor I had written into every line that used to choke me in silence. And when the final spotlight faded, there was a pause, a heartbeat of breathless stillness. Then the room exploded, a standing ovation that rolled through the aisles like thunder. I stepped onto the stage, shaking, stunned eyes stinging. The cast took their bows. I joined them last, alone. Just me and the truth I had fought to tell. In the crowd, I saw my mother with tears in her eyes, Callum's grin that could have lit the Hudson, Jamie mouthing, "This is it," and Scarlett's silent hand over heart nodding once. Later that night at the after-party, people toasted, congratulated, made promises. But the moment that stayed with me came when I slipped away to the rooftop. The city below glittered restless and alive. Callum joined me, 2 glasses in hand. You know, he said the best part isn't the reviews or the standing ovation. No, he shook his head. It's that you made something no one can take away. He raised his glass. To authorship. I clinked mine to his. To second drafts. Weeks passed. Second Draft Studios signed a multi-year development deal with a major platform. The Margaret Hale Fellowship was established, fully funded for emerging female storytellers. The Pineview Artist Retreat opened its doors to its first residency group. And I got a letter, typed, on creamy, expensive paper, from a private arts academy, the one that once rejected my transfer request when I dared to apply without an acting resume or recommendation letter. They wanted me to guest lecture. Topic: reframing narrative power in a post-legacy era. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. 1 year to the day since I was evicted from the family estate with nothing but a coat, a laptop, and 1 burned bridge. I bought a brownstone in Harlem. Not flashy, not ostentatious, just warm. I turned the parlor into a writing room, hung photos of my grandmother, left 1 chair empty beside the window. A reminder this story started long before me. I didn't rebuild the Hale legacy. I rewrote it. And now, if you're still listening, if something in my story echoed in yours, let me leave you with this. You don't need permission to rewrite your life. You don't need an apology from those who underestimated you. You don't even need closure. You just need 1 moment of breathtaking honesty with yourself. I had mine in a motel bathtub. Where will you have yours? The stage is yours now. Tell your story, write your second draft, and make it something no one can take away. Before you go, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. It always amazes me how stories connect us across oceans and time zones. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There's so much more to come, and I'd be honored to have you on this journey with me. Thank you truly for spending your time here. Your presence means more than you know. Until next time, take care, be kind to yourself, and remember